Hello fellow people, I am a crazy person who is still brainrotting about Deltarune. This video will make zero sense, is completely self-indulgent, and is only made for the sake of putting things in order so they would stop randomly rotating in my head like in a microwave. Plus, it's to get the new theories I got out of my head, which would be sprinkled when we get to certain characters. There we go, I can put theory in a title now. Though it's more like ramblings of a mad woman. The topic at hand? Establishing where every character is and how the counterparts in Undertale fit into this. And who knows, maybe by looking at who exists in one world but doesn't in another will give us more theorizing fuel. But don't expect anything here to be some grand revelations. This is mostly a summary of everyone put in one place, plus some moments when I go off the rails and you yell at me, it's not that deep. I just like looking at connections and character relationships. Obligatory ground rules. First thing, we're not bringing up darkness for obvious reasons. Second thing, I will be using some outside materials, most important of which will be the cancelled alarm clock app. Which brings us to third thing. Again, this is just for fun, is in no way to be taken as canon to have a canon, and will be filled to ears with speculation. Feel free to throw in your ideas in the comments. To add some structure to this stupid thing, let's first get a list of important and notable characters. As in, name ones that are not just generic monster NPCs. Those we'll check in at the end. Here we only like our memorable NPCs. Now we'll go through them one by one, starting with the ones we don't have to think with much, and then moving more into speculation, closer to the zone I lovingly named Who the fuck is Kris, which surprisingly doesn't only contain Kris. Also, for the structure's sake, I will check in all the dreamers at the end together, and same with our paradox darlings, Suns and Papyrus. Let's start with our Undertale friends. Undyne is here, still taking up a guardian type position, but in this world she didn't lose an eye. Yet. She seems to still have some kind of relationship with Asgore. He probably turned her as a cop like he did with her as a royal guard. Alphys is still an otaku, but in this world she didn't take up science, which will become relevant in a couple of minutes. And here we already get more changes. In Undertale she was a Hotland native, who was like a big sister to Berdly and Caddy. In Deltarune though, she recently moved to hometown. Long enough to be a teacher with some tenure, but not long enough to know the lore of the town. So a couple years at most. Next we get Napstablook. They still enjoy making remixes, but here they accidentally became a cop and can quit because they're the sole provider for the cousins. Speaking of, both Metaton and Mad Mew are present, except neither have their corporeal forms. And both are kinda Alphys' fault? Okay, that's mean. I would think she's more subtle in her weebness, so a gigantic anime girl action figure for Maddie to possess is kinda off the table. And she's not a scientist and she's not trying to impress Asgore with soul inventions, so Hopstablook doesn't have their robot body. They're left to yearn for it, making a sketch for it in the library computer lab once, and wishing for some entertainment. Well, they have Tana now, so at least Happy got that. Maybe one day they'll even leave the house. Since I mentioned them, Berdly and Caddy are here, not besties yet, slowly working through their enemies to lovers arc. And here we hit an interesting thing in the Switch universes. Caddy's parents and Caddy with an eye don't exist in Undertale, at least they're not mentioned. For simplicity, let's assume they also live in Hotland where Caddy is working? Makes sense they'll be in the same area. Also, there are no reasons to assume they don't exist, they're not that important. Rounding out our notable vendors, Burger Pants and Nice Cream Guy are here too, good for them. I hope everything works out at the festival and Pizza Pants isn't too mad about the catfishing. Please, I need to see the conclusion to the surprise Yaoi mini arc. Gerson is dead, but at least we got to meet his memory. Still as kick-ass as we were told he was. Now taking another young girl under his wing, even if just for a few hours. His wife, Mrs. Boom, and son, Alvin, were never mentioned in Undertale though. Take that as you will. And now with the warm-up done, onto our classmates where the fun begins. Let's start with Monster Kid, who's the most unchanged. They're older, not a kid anymore. In Undertale I'm pretty sure they were implied to be from Snowdin, only going to Waterfall to watch Undyne fight. Which is also interesting because in Deltarune they seem to be scared of her instead. Yes child, be scared of cops. They kept mentioning their parents too, and we have no reasons to assume they're not a thing in the other world. And I will not be discussing the Ghana kid because that's deep lore territory that I don't like stepping into. The kid basically described what Deltarune is, and that's as far as I will take it. Next up, Snowy the Snowdrake. Still has a comedian dad, still has a dead mom, except here she's actually dead and not melded with like 16 other people. He was in Snowdin and ran away from home after Crystal fell down and Alphys stopped responding to letters. And here, unexpectedly, we hit our first instance of weird-ass time shenanigans. Because you would assume from Monster Kid that every teen we see in class would be a kid in Undertale, it makes sense, right? And it does track with every other character. But in Undertale, the check during the battle refers to Snowy as a teen comedian. You might be looking at the screen with a raised eyebrow wondering why is it a big deal. Why didn't he age like other kids in Deltarune? That's weird. Okay, maybe snowbird dragon monsters are aging differently, fine. Or since it's a small town and they didn't have enough kids to make a class, Snowy had to wait a few years until they got enough, and he's actually older than the rest of the teens. Next on the weirdness scale, we got Tammy. The question is, which Tammy? Let's cross off the ones she can't be. Not the vendor, that one had grey hair. Not Bob for obvious reasons. Not the one who's allergic or she would have gotten covered in hives. Which, keep in mind that one little detail, we shall take it and throw it blindly into the growing pile of who the fuck is Kris to tackle later. If I had to pick a Tammy, I'd say she's the one with the egg. That's the most obvious choice. Unless every Tammy in a hive mind is invested in hatching hard-boiled eggs. Okay, excluding the paradox characters I said we'll cover later, these are all the people we actually see/hear from in both Undertale and Deltarune. Plus their direct connections that don't need much speculation, we can assume they exist in the same places. From here on, we get into the Anomaly Land. Characters that only appear in one world, that are only mentioned in extra dialogue, or not mentioned at all and we need to find connections for ourselves. Starting off this layer with, maybe surprising to some, Susie. Yeah, out of all these fuckers, she surprisingly has the most canon material that tells us where she is in Undertale. And to introduce that kind of material, we need to welcome a very special guest. She doesn't need an introduction, give it up for Easter egg fun value lore, give a clam girl! Let's remind ourselves on her actual full dialogue, besides the 2 relevant lines we all know. And she has a lot, and it's all interesting considering what we know now. I'm visiting Waterfall from the city. Synchronicity? My neighbor's daughter looks about your age. Her name is Susie. I feel like you two should be friends. You have a neighbor's blessing. If you talk to her again, not knowing where I live is no issue. Fate finds a way. In life's great scheme, she might be why you came here in the first place. If you specifically killed Undyne, I sense a disturbance in the nearby area. I think you should leave that girl alone. If you talk to her again after beating Asriel. So you never met my neighbor's daughter. Don't despair. This world has infinite opportunities, but there's a limit to the things you can do today. Accepting this is healthy. Take my neighbor's blessing, and consider this a blessing for anything you like. If you talk to her for the first time after beating Asriel, I wanted to tell you about my neighbor's daughter, but you walked right by me before I could tell you. Fate has decided that I should not tell you. And of course the infamous Switch exclusive extra dialogue. So you never met my neighbor's daughter. But please don't despair, because the time you will meet her is fast approaching. Deltarune released a month later, confirming that despite a different spelling, this is our Susie she's talking about. So what can we gather about Undertale's version of Susie from this? She is a very young kid, Frisk's age, who lives in the city, not Waterfall itself, with at least one parent, because again there needs to be a neighbor for her to be the daughter of. And Frisk and Susie meeting is, at least in Clamgirl's eyes, a predetermined fated event. Fate being a part of almost every mention of her. Almost like prophecy? Isn't it also interesting how Clamgirl appears literally in the next room to where Gerson's shop is? The one who told us about Deltarune. The one who now has mentored Susie herself. Fate really finds a way. Also, I find it interesting how the dialogue changes if you specifically kill Undyne. Not on the monster that's affected, only Undyne. And it's a warning to stay away from Susie, when in Deltarune our Susie is now motivated to save Undyne from the bunker. And you can't even say I'm overthinking, who the fuck knows what parts Toby came up with already at this point in time. Anyway, let's circle back to the important part that could tell us about Susie's home life. She has at least one parent mentioned. There are no reasons to believe anything about the change between universes, so then let's add to it her crushed out empty room, the constant hunger, the uncomfortable reaction to Toriel being drunk, the way Queen antagonizes and belittles her, the potential keen parallels that everyone discussed, the way she didn't contact her parents in at least 2 days. Yeah, you get the unflattering picture. We'll circle back to her and the Fate talk after we attempt to figure out who the fuck Kris is. By our established pattern, I should probably talk about holidays next. But when I was writing this, I discovered a huge fucking plot hole that involves them and automatically send them into the void tier. So instead, first we're gonna jump to our last 2 classmates that don't have literally any mentions or references to in Undertale. Sorta. First, my sweet idiot son Berdly. Trust me, I did my duty as a Berdly fan, and there is nothing that would signify his existence. But there is someone else that might still work to show us where he could be, theoretically, with some mind hoops. At Grillby's, there's this one drunk-ass pink bird, the one that translates for Grillby, or as revealed in True Pacifist, just make shit up without actually listening to him. She's also, interestingly, the only one of this group of NPCs who comments on something being very wrong if you killed the dogs or Undyne. Sure, others make comments noticing that people disappeared, but she's the only one who outright notes that something about it is off. Which reminded me of how Berdly was the only one on Snowgrave who noticed that something is very fucking wrong with Kris and Noelle, before he was promptly put into coma for deciding to do something about it. Oh, also, this red bird is the only bird monster we've seen around in the entire game. Snowdrakes are a different thing entirely, and the little ducky seems like a regular duck, not a monster. All this to say, I think this is Berdly's mom. They look very similar too, save for the feather coloration. I know I start sounding like a FNAF fan barely stopping at counting toes, but it just makes sense to me when I look at them side by side. And if my brain rot is correct and this is Berdly's mom, he lives in Snowdon. Oh, and if you think me pulling a random nobody NPC to explain where Berdly is weird and a stretch, well, rest assured it won't happen again, because I have literally nothing for Jockington. There's not a glance, not a piece of text, not a random snake NPC that could be finagled into some kind of connection. Nothing. There are no snakes, there are barely any lizards and none that would fit. There aren't even any characters that would be that focused on sports. Literally nothing. Jockington, for some reason, is the one character that straight up doesn't exist in Undertale in any way, shape or bullshit stretch. Do with that what you will. I have no deep lore explanations for it. Unless, to be honest, I always found his sprite kinda off-putting. Frozen in an unnatural pose with mouth hanging open like that. I can't explain it, it's just off. And he's one of the few characters that has a dialogue sprite, which some people took to mean that he will appear in Dark World. And that's not even mentioning him being the only one who the prophecy calls out by name specifically. And then there's one of the hidden prophecies that says they'll see the tail of Heltic roll, which reminds me of a snake, and Jockington is literally the only snake we've ever seen in both games. And then something else about him was pointed out to me by a friend. Why the fuck is his speech deteriorating? Like, yeah, we were told he's a himbo, this dude got like a little peanut rolling around in the empty space between his columella, but he wasn't talking like this. It's getting worse day by day. Which actually reminded me of another character who technically doesn't exist in Undertale outside of a very specific occurrence, and who's also stuck bent over in a natural pose with mouth hanging open, and whose speech has been notably deteriorating day by day. Is Jockington a fucking goner? I literally have no other proof for it, but how the fuck do you explain the similarities? It's eerie, and pairing that with the fact that he's the only one we can't find even a bullshit connection for in Undertale? Yeah, I don't know. Now the holidays. All information about whom comes from the cancelled alarm clock app, specifically Asgard's monologue. What can we gather about them on a first glance through? They live in Snowdon, Rudy has died, presumably from his illness, Noelle is still shy, Des is alive, and they both got out to the surface. Carol is not mentioned, but is implied to exist. Noelle and Des had to come from somewhere. Also, for some reason, she is not the mayor, despite living in Snowdon. Oh, also, Rudy and Asgard were so fucking gay for each other, it's not even jokes anymore. Like, holy shit, Asgard freezing. Now, you might think this is an open and shut case, why did I put them so far down the script? Well, let's read through the rest of Asgard's monologue, carefully. Remember the facts as we go along. Asgard first met Rudy at Hogland University, and they were both young, but Asgard doesn't age as a boss monster, so Rudy visibly outgrew him. So far so good. Or so you would think. Let me ask you a question. Where the fuck is Asriel at this time? Let me remind you of a little piece of lore. Boss monsters don't age unless they have a child. When they have a child, it absorbs soul energy from their parents, and the parents age as the child grows. Asgard was young when he and Rudy met. And when people say I met someone at university, they mean they both go to it. But it doesn't make sense for him to be young or be anywhere near our uni if Asriel's story already happened.
That's impossible, it doesn't make any sense.
Sure, we could say Asgard was teaching there or something, except it's not his area at all, and he was never implied to have anything to do with teaching, except once meeting kids for a special project. Asgard was looking young enough for Rudy to visibly outgrow him, and I don't think Rudy has lived for hundreds of years. I ask you again, where the fuck is Asriel? Are you telling me that a long time ago was actually like a decade ago?
That's impossible, it doesn't make any sense.
We were told that the incident with Asriel and Chara dying was so long ago that it's now practically a legend. Let's refresh ourselves on the timeline. Chara fell into the underground, enough time passed for the family dynamic to be established. Until they got that one stupid idea, Asriel absorbed Chara's soul, was mortally wounded by humans on the surface, and died in the throne room garden. Kingdom got into mourning, Asgard declared war on humans in the fit of rage. Enough time passed that Toriel noticed that he's not actually doing anything to free monsters and is just waiting for humans to fall to them instead, so she took Chara's body and left at the ruins. Toriel living was so long ago that nobody remembers her or what she looked like. Enough time passed for 6 separate humans to fall into the underground, and then enough time passed for the last one, for Frisk's arrival to be a surprise and for monsters to not remember what humans look like, except for some that are specifically locked in on this stuff, like Undyne and Alphys. Speaking of, another plot hole I found. Alphys somehow knows which flower was the first to appear just before the queen left, implying she was around for it. But when first meeting Toriel, she's surprised to see that she looks like the same species as Asgard. So do you or do you not recognize the queen? And before you scream Gaster in the same cadence you usually scream Sans, we know every single one of the entries in the true lab was from Alphys, except for the hidden entry 17, that technically doesn't even exist, because there is an unused entry 17 from Alphys 2 that follows the timeline of her story. Also, they can't exist at the same time, because one of the Gaster followers mentioned that Asgore took a long time to hire a new royal scientist after Gaster fell into his creation, so they never crossed paths. So, which is it? Did the entire story that took the entire underground to its core so much that nobody even mentions Asriel's name happen just a couple decades ago? But why do people then not remember who Toriel is, and why do they not recognize a human when they see one if 6 of them fell one after another in just a few years?
That's impossible. It doesn't make any sense.
How can Asgore meeting Rudy happen before this whole story? Des and Noella kids and were able to get to the surface with everyone, so it can't be that the family existed long ago. Or Asgore couldn't have been young looking enough for Rudy to outgrow him. Dude looks like 40 and we know he's been stuck looking like that since Asriel died. What is happening? So I think the easiest explanation is just a simple Toby Forgore, because if not, the timeline is fucked. And this plot hole is why I yeeted holidays all the way here into the tier that was actually named Where the fuck is Asriel all along. And speaking of him, Deltarune's Asriel is at college, which again brings up the timeline shifting, since him and Chara died long before any of the other kids would have been born, no matter how you slice it. And also, Asriel is Flowey, at least in broad strokes. Which actually we can use to inform us of who he is behind the cookie-cutter perfect nice guy image we got by proxy of him being a child and also dead. Because let me tell you something. I really find it weird how most of the fandom paints Asriel some kinda saint that would do no wrong, as if he's Ralsei 2.0 who himself is Asriel 2.0. Nah, did you forget the part where Flowey is still Asriel, just soulless? He was still a little shit of a kid, just as capable of cruelty as anyone else. Being soulless just brought out those intrusive thoughts into actions. So I wouldn't be surprised if Asriel comes back from college and turns out he's a massive stoner. And I'm only half joking. Oh, speaking of Asriel being older, I don't think Toriel and Asgore are aging in Deltarune. We know he's like in his 20s, so shouldn't his parents, by dynamics of how boss monsters work, have aged another 10 years from how they look like in Undertale? Toby Forgore again? Or do boss monsters work differently in this universe since there's little to no magic in Light World? And moving from one kid to another, Kris is not Chara. Come the fuck on, guys, it's not even close. But the green shirt! Oh, glad to know you've only ever worn one outfit your entire life. An outfit that doesn't even match in colors. If colors matter so much, if anyone, shouldn't Kris be Frisk then? Skin and hair colors match perfectly, there's already a lot more than the Chara connection. And while we're here, let's address the fandom white Mandela effect. Chara's eyes are brown. Yes, even during the spooky scare screamers. They were always brown. The only time we saw red eyes was during Soulless pacifist ending. And who is that in the bed that flashed as red eyes? Frisk. If one of them has red eyes, it would be Frisk, which would match Kris's eyes, which we know for a fact are red. So these two completely match visually, so that must mean Kris is Frisk, right? Open shut case. The time loop theory likers rejoice. Yeah, not quite. Hey, remember when I told you to remember something about Tam? Hi, random piece of lore and flavor text. Frisk is allergic to Tammys, but Kris isn't. There aren't any indications of it, no matter how much they interact with one we have in class. So either they don't bother expressing their allergy in any way, or they developed an immunity by now through the years of interacting with her in class, or they never had it to begin with. And there are still similarities to Chara that are way too on the nose to be random. The knife, the love of mom's pie, liking all things chocolate, the shitty troll chaos gremlin personality, the entire adoption backstory. It's like Kris is a mix of Frisk visuals and Chara's personality. And that's not even bringing up the fact that Susie and Frisk are fated to meet, but never do in this universe. That Susie might be the reason why Frisk even came here in the first place. So what does that add to the theory? And then we add the weird tiny connections Kris shows to some of the other 6 humans and their things, fighting a faded ribbon as the first piece of armor with the passive effect of making you look cuter, which Ralsei specifically encourages Kris to put on. He doesn't do that with any other piece of armor, sus. Kris being surprisingly good at ballet moves, the whole cooking segment plus the green soul literally utilizing a shield move, the cowboy shooting segment. I don't know what to make of this, but it is very fucking weird and stood out to me for some reason. So who the fuck are they? Not Chara, that's for certain. Maybe Frisk, it's more likely. Or a secret option, a third random human child with no relation to the other two besides intentional parallels to throw us off. Or, an even secretive fourth option, a combination of aspects of every human and their souls. There are plenty of theories on this question already, go watch those instead. I don't think anyone made the other humans connection yet though. And to finish off, let's go up a tier and finally address the Skelly Bros. We all have theories. I'm of the camp that thinks it's impossible to ignore the references to Sans was from Deltarune originally all along, which means Papyrus is probably from here too, if he even exists, which would be a fun twist. We know they appeared in Snowdin one day and asserted themselves. We know Sans has some weird machine. We know that if you specifically talk to Clam Girl, the contents of the drawing in the workshop change to a poorly drawn picture of 3 smiling people with a "Don't Forget" written on it. And we now have a direct answer to what place was talked about in the title It's Raining Somewhere Else. What does it mean? How did that happen? Fuck if I know. I'm not a deep lore person, I let people more brain-rotten than me handle that. And of course, I'll finish up with our good doctor, who may or may not even exist and is such an opportunity for a troll moment. Would Gaster actually be hiding in the form of Jockington? I wouldn't be surprised at this point. And once again, Gaster is the deep lore shit I don't fuck with, and many more people have already did all the work compiling references to him, so watch those instead. After finishing my video, because we're not done. Son, but you already discussed everyone. Are you really going to go through every NPC? Nah, all these parallels between characters and the places in the mirror worlds got me cooking up a theory for Deltarune's ending. Wait, but didn't you already make that video? Yes, I did. It was shortly after the chapters came out and I have new ideas. Shush. This is the part where I just rant out my every thought in rapid succession, try to keep up. So, I'm now convinced that Deltarune will end with Susie absorbing Kris's soul and it's somehow helping defeat the night / end the roaring / close every fountain. Not the most creative idea, I admit, but it feels right to me. Undertale's inciting incident, the first event, was Asriel absorbing Chara's soul in an attempt to break the barrier. It makes sense to me that Deltarune's last event will be Susie absorbing Kris's soul to close the fountains, thus in a way putting up a barrier between light and dark worlds. If these stories really are parallel like this, a mirror of the biggest event that we know of would be kind of expected. Not to mention the soul modes coming in reverse order of how they were shown in the final battle, seemingly. If next we get purple, it would be pretty much confirmed. Reverse order of events. First event becoming last. Besides that, all the references to Susie representing / wanting to be a dragon, when we know absorbing a human soul turns a monster into a creature with unimaginable power. And we don't know yet if this soul is something Kris can survive without long term, so it might kill them in the process. No, scratch that. Susie has no idea about Kris being able to go without the soul for any periods of time, so if the prophecy said something about her absorbing it, she would think Kris has to die, which of course would make her angry. Hell, the process might kill them both, we don't know if she'll be able to survive this. Her body might turn to dust because of all the determination. We saw what that shit did to Undyne, and that was just her own. Something weapon of justice missing in eye theory. Or Susie will die if the soul is removed, if it's fused with hers. But then it would mean Kris will die, so there's this choice, which one should live? I don't know, the prophecy didn't say anything about that part, maybe player has to choose. Or, if we want a happier ending, Susie will turn to dust if the soul is not removed, so Kris rips it out of her themselves, losing a hand in the process, but at least they're both alive. Pick whichever idea you like most. I had all of these scenarios animated in my head, and I can honestly see all of them. How the fuck did this turn into another 6-page script? Yeah, I don't know. This was my very self-indulgent video. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong somehow. Like, look, how else would you explain the freaking plot hole with Rudy and Asgore? What the fuck is happening to Jockington? And what ideas do you have about the ending? Oh, and who's your favorite NPC? And I'll see you on the other side.